Oh, hey guys, it's Max Powers. I figured while I'm stuck in the car, and I've always promised you my Bigfoot sighting story, that I'm going to do it while I'm right here and trapped on a road. It happened, God, 30 some odd years ago. I was a very young teenager. My family used to vacation every weekend, for my entire life. From the time I was 3 or 4 until I think we were still going there when I was about 20. I know in college, first couple years of college, we were vacationing there as well. So we would go to this spot in the woods, way off in the woods. Not really, but yeah, maybe 20 minutes off the highway. And we had a bunch of friends that would go there too. There were these cabins in the woods. And we would do a lot of hiking. There was cross-country skiing. We would go downhill skiing. It was an awesome vacation. There was a lake for the summer. As little kids, we would play in the woods of New Hampshire, and our parents would just go for it. The property that we would rent was 1,200 acres. And that was attached to a couple of tracts of conservation land, and all in all, it was this run of tens of thousands of acres. And that was just, if you crossed a route which is about the size of the road I'm on, so just a 2-lane little highway, then you'd get to another tract of land like that, and there was the Appalachian Trail ran through it. So there was some woods. This guy is backing up on a highway. That's always good. All right. So we would go up there. There was a lot of hiking trails. And a couple exits before you would pull off to go to where we stayed, there was a pull off on an exit on the highway, but there was nothing there. There was a gas station and an electronic relay station or something like that, and that was it. But there was a parking lot, and on the back side of that parking lot was a trail that led up and over the mountain that we were basically driving around. And so we would drive up, my dad would drive up, and he'd pull in there, and my mom would hop in the driver's seat and take the car back to, we called it a chalet. She'd take it to the chalet, and we would hike the rest of the way. Sometimes there were, me and my dad. Sometimes there were groups of people who were also going up to the same place that we were going. And we would hike basically up. There was this dirt road. So you'd hike up this dirt road through the woods. There was this old hermit's cabin, and we'd pass the hermit's cabin, and then there was a lake, and we'd pass the lake, and eventually you would run out of trail, and you'd get to a stone wall, or you'd run out of dirt road, you'd get to a stone wall, and that's how you got to where we were going. You'd follow the stone wall. So you'd follow the stone wall up, and it was a mixed forest. So there were evergreens, there were maple. As you got higher up this mountain, and as you get in, there was this little, in New Hampshire, we call them notches. And, there's Franconian notch, there's all kinds of notches. And it's just the spot between two mountains. It's a pass, basically. So you would hike up this trail, and it would get narrower and narrower, and it would get darker and colder, and there'd be more rocks, and the moss would start to show up. And we were hiking up and through that, and you'd come out on the other side, and you were in now on the northeast side of the mountain, and you were in an evergreen forest, and it was just beautiful. It was really just gorgeous, and there was moss on the rocks, and so on this particular occasion, it was just my dad and I, and I used to get in the woods out there these feelings. Some days were good days when I'd go in the woods, and this was even just as a little kid. I knew the days I could go in the woods and the days that I'd be frightened to death almost in those woods. So my dad and I were alone. We got through the pass and we were walking, and it was one of those, like, I had that feeling. And if you are out looking for Bigfoot, if you know Bigfoot, whoa, that light changed real fast. There we go. Then you know that feeling I'm talking about. It's the feeling of absolute dread, impending doom. Oh my God, I'm gonna die. And I had had that feeling for, like just about the time the car pulled away. So it was the point of no return. If I was gonna get to the chalet, I had to go up and over this mountain. So my dad and I were walking. We weren't saying much, just walking through the woods. And at one point in this trail, you go along this rock ledge on the uphill side, and the downhill side is just this gorgeous evergreen forest. And there's like ferns and what have you. This was fall. It was probably early fall because the ferns were all still green. There was still some ground cover. And we came around at the end of the rock face, which was to our left. The trail kind of turns again around the rocks, and we came around those rocks, and I'm trying to think, 20 feet, maybe 25 feet in front of us was, now my dad is, at the time, he was 6'3", and probably about 270 pounds, former Marine, a hockey player, hockey coach, football coach, coached everything. This was a big man. This was a big man who could handle himself. And this thing dwarfed my dad. It was a big, hairy man. It wasn't an ape. It was a big, hairy man. And it wasn't like Lou Ferrigno or, Arnold Schwarzenegger. It was like rugby player big, like that whole big core strength. And he was dead ahead, and we kind of surprised him, and you could tell by the look on his face. They have 8 facial expressions. They have, and his eyes just kind of opened up, and he looked like, oh, shit. And just his whole body turned, and he stepped off the trail to the downhill side and was just gone into that evergreen forest, like at the drop of a hat. But I got to see him, and it was pretty impressive. He was this, I don't even know, it was almost a mossy green brown. It was like a light brown, but there was, kind of a greenish, grayish. So it wasn't like his fur was dirty. It was just like, an odd color, and I won't forget it. And his skin was kind of a taupey color. He had very pronounced features of brow ridge, which was fleshy, not hairy, and then it went back to almost a round cap on his head. I'm almost to where I'm going, so I'm just going to pull over right here so I can finish my story. So he had this kind of roundish cap to his head, and he had some hair, but this, he had kind of a male pattern baldness thing going on. His head was just huge. I remember that. And his jaw was this big, wide, square jaw. The space between his nose and his upper, his upper lip, I guess you'd call it, before it hit the actual lip, was huge. It was just way bigger proportionally than ours. And I'm an artist, and I understand like facial proportion, body proportion, and so his facial proportions and his body proportions were very different than ours. He was muscular, had biceps, and he had this long hair. But it was like it would drape apart, like over parts that stuck out. So, like his shoulder caps, up on his neck. Is that trapezoids? What is that? They kind of went into his ears like that. His head was down low on his shoulders, and where like pointy parts were, or peaked parts, that hair would part, and you could see the skin underneath. So it was like I was close up. I could see this thing. He was really big. His chest, it was and stomach were covered with hair. But it was thinner on those parts, and it was still a pretty long hair. And it was a straight hair. It wasn't like our body hair that's curly. Um, yeah, he was a big, big thing, and he had a very knowing look. I remember coming around that corner, and the two of us, actually the three of us, my dad and I and it, all just kind of stopped. Like, whoa! He was surprised to see us. Needless to say, we were surprised to see him. Um, and he was just massive. But his facial expressions, it was a look of, oh, and you could tell that from him. Um, the fear that I had, that impending doom that I mentioned earlier, just went away. It's a sheer, like an utter surprise. Um, yeah, that's all I can call it. It was shock. Like, holy smokes, what is that thing? And I remember, when you were driving the car with your parents and they would jam on the brakes and they'd do that. And that's exactly what my dad did. We didn't have brakes to jam on, but all of a sudden I felt like his hand on my chest. Like, hey, he, stopped me. The thing looked at us and it just stepped away. It was a downhill step and it was one huge, like, just one big smooth step right off the edge and down. Like I said, there were ferns and there were smaller pine trees around, and he just kind of disappeared into the underbrush in the woods. And we didn't talk about it. My dad and I just he was like, all right, come on, let's go. And we continued on past where this thing had been standing and made it down to the chalet, and probably in record time, because you travel fast after something like that. But that was a nutshell version of my sighting. Usually I go on and on, but I really haven't told the story since my brain has slowed down a bit. So that was my Bigfoot sighting. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a good one. Okay, this is a postscript to the Bigfoot sighting. So we got down to the cabin and the chalet, and before we got there, like, there's this field that we have to cross, and as we got to the field and we were out of the woods, so like the coast was clear kind of thing, my dad turned to me and he said, "Don't you dare tell your mother," because he knew neither of us would have been allowed in the woods. So that "don't you dare tell your mother" soon became my dad saying, "Oh, it was a bear," because people knew something was up, and so someone just texted me. There was a ding. I'm going to a party, so anyway, but yeah, it became, my dad told people that he saw a bear, and for years he told me he saw a bear, and he got sick a few years back, and we thought that was it. He was going, and over the few days that he was in the hospital, he has since passed away. But over those few days he was in the hospital, and we thought he was going to go, he had that moment. He like came clean with everyone. Not that he had much to come clean with, because he was a great guy, but the one thing he told me, he looked at me and he said, "Hey, that was no bear." That was all he had to say. I knew, and since then I've kind of had a renewed enthusiasm for the subject of Bigfoot. So that's my Bigfoot story. I'm going to watch the Pats. Have a good one.